In 1984, I was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps 2 years prior. I was newly married. I'd never been arrested for anything in my life. And the next thing I know, I was fighting for my life. I knew I was innocent, so they couldn't take that away from me. I read a book, and it talked about a killing in England. They convicted a person based on genetic fingerprinting or DNA testing. That's where my epiphany came. I felt like if it can convict you, it can free you. I took the test myself. It took over a year. But in the end of the day, I became the first person in the United States freed by DNA testing.
I don't think you're truly aware of how many innocent people are actually in jail until you start working in this field and until you start reviewing the cases as we do here.
The Pennsylvania Innocence Project was formed in 2008. The roots, though, go back to 2006 when a small group of dedicated people led by David Richmond and David Radofsky met with the New York Innocence Project and came up with the idea and need for the Innocence Project in Pennsylvania.
When the Innocence Project was started in New York, I contacted Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld. We knew each other. And I said if there were cases in Pennsylvania that needed investigation and litigation, that we would be interested. Soon thereafter, we were contacted about a case concerning Bruce Gottschalk. Claimed he was innocent, claimed there was still biological evidence that might be available. We finally were able to obtain the DNA evidence, even though the DA objected initially. A judge ordered them to turn it over. That was tested and proved that he was innocent. So that case opened our eyes.
A number of representatives of the Innocence Project, the founding project in New York, came to Philadelphia with the mission of stimulating interest among members of the Philadelphia legal community in establishing an Innocence Project. That meeting in November of 2006 led to the formation of a working group of lawyers, academics, criminal lawyers, non-criminal lawyers.
In our first 5 years, the Pennsylvania Innocence Project has received support from over 60 firms, 15 foundations, over 500 generous individuals, over 20 nonprofit organizations, and 3 governmental agencies. One of the initial supporters of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project and a vital supporter was Jerry Lenfest.
A watershed in the germination of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project was finding a home, and that was made possible by Temple Law School's Dean Joanne Epps.
We officially opened our doors in April 2009, and when we did open our doors, immediately we were inundated with hundreds of letters from inmates throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
So we know there are a lot of wrongful convictions. There are 4 or 5 major contributing factors: inaccurate or incorrect eyewitness identification, false confessions, poor forensics, bad lab work, ineffective defense lawyers, either because they're not properly prepared or because they have so many cases it's impossible for them to represent everybody effectively. And finally, in a significant number of cases, we find that the prosecutor or the police have acted unfairly, haven't turned over significant exculpatory evidence, or have actually, in some cases, tried to frame somebody.
It's a long process. We want to make sure that we are taking only cases where of the actual innocent. And we are very careful about how we vet these cases, because I want to see the case in the worst light to the defendant. I want to see the strongest case the Commonwealth had. And if we look at that and we still have some concern, and that's where our law students get involved.
We couldn't function without all the volunteer students that we have from the local law schools, as well as lawyers who are willing to help us both pre-litigation and once we get into litigation.
You're essentially the first person on the case to determine whether this individual truly is innocent.
I got to meet with an inmate who was the client that I was representing at the time and meet face-to-face with somebody who had been incarcerated for decades who was claiming innocence, and we had the opportunity to investigate his crime and actually find out if that was a situation that was going on.
The first day of work, I was given 6 humongous boxes of files for one case, and you are basically looking through the entirety of this person's case.
Then we take it to a committee of 3 very experienced criminal lawyers, at least 2 of whom have to have been former prosecutors, and we present the case to them. The student will have presented a 40 to 50 page report. If the committee approves it, then we can look at it for an investigation.
I learn the case as much as I can. I review all the old transcripts, I review any type of police reports, I review everything that the student has reviewed, that the volunteers have already reviewed, so I'm 100% familiar with the case. And once I do that, I start tracking down witnesses.
If the investigation yields evidence that this is a person who should not be in prison and we have a means to get them out, then we start the litigation.
You just can't predict what's going to happen with the court system, and that's true of any litigation, but particularly in the post-conviction setting, the client's been convicted. There's no presumption of innocence, so you're fighting that uphill battle.
In 2013, the Pennsylvania Innocence Project helped to release 2 men from prison. They had been in prison for half of their lives for a murder that neither one had anything to do with.
Eugene Gilliard and Lance Felder actually was the one we've been involved from day one. When we first opened our doors, it was the fruition of everyone's hard work and emotional concerns.
They had been convicted of a murder. They were 18 and 19 when they were convicted, and they have been in prison half their lives.
Interns were there for pretty much every day of trial, so we really felt emotionally invested in the case.
On the day that the judge announced her decision, I was sitting right behind Eugene's mother. And I don't think it really hit me until I heard her say, "I have my son back." It's not just the individual, it's the mother, it's the sister, it's the brother. And to be able to be a part of that healing is just an extraordinary opportunity.
You just really got the sense of what it felt like to have justice finally served.
What we do know is that there are a lot more wrongful convictions than we thought. Experts have estimated anywhere from 3% to 10%, of people in prison. That's a lot of people regardless of whether it's even on the lower end. And the real question is now, what do we do about that going forward?
From the very beginning, we have been involved not just in representing these individuals who truly need our help, but in working to reform the system, to make sure that this doesn't keep happening. So we have met with state senators, state representatives, chiefs of police, district attorneys, judges, all the players that we can meet with in the system to hammer the same message.
Reform of the criminal justice system is unattainable unless we educate the members of the bar about the inadequacies in the criminal justice system that lead to inaccurate results.
We all want the same thing. We want to get the right guy. We want to make sure the wrong guy is not ensnared in this. And that message resonates. When we did a presentation in front of 200 police officers on how to reform the way we do eyewitness identification, the officers in the room who had never heard about it before were astonished. 201, they wanted this change. All across the state, we are changing the conversation.
Innocence Project really opened my eyes to how many innocent individuals are currently incarcerated today.
Every day I get up and think about the possibility of someone being in prison for a crime they didn't commit, and try to think, would someone be there to help me if I was in that position?
Everyone deserves a solid defense. No matter where you come from, what your background is, you deserve somebody who's going to advocate for you zealously.
My experience at the Innocence Project was probably the most rewarding experience of law school for me because it got me face to face with somebody who'd been affected by the legal system.
This is why I went to law school. We want to make sure that the system works fairly for defendants and for victims. And the way to do that is to really make sure that the trial process is fair.
We don't defend with full zealousness. What we've learned is that there's a huge risk that many people who are totally innocent could be executed, number one, and number two, will serve many, many years, maybe life in prison. That's a justice disaster. And if there's a way of preventing that, that's what we should be working for.